Today we're going to talk about a Southern California rider who was a wild thing.
Wild thing.
He was wild, and he was a good rider too. He eventually moved up Northern California and was racing at Fast Fridays. He was an excellent rider. He was a hard charger. He was a wild thing, that's for sure. And his highest finish was third place in the United States Speedway Nationals in the 1990s. Like I mentioned, he was a solid rider. And he had a pretty nice list of credentials, especially as a junior rider. And who was that? It was the wild thing, Louis Kossuth. Today, we're honoring Louis, what would have been his 60th birthday. Rest in peace, Louis Kossuth. He passed away approximately 5 years ago in Northern California. He was in his workshop, and he was found on the floor. He had had an apparent heart attack. And they immediately rushed Louis to the hospital. And I guess they said he was brain dead and he would not come out of it. And it was a very difficult decision to pull the plug on him. And he was laid to rest. And he was just an amazing guy. He was only 55 years old. That was only 5 years ago. Today, like I mentioned, was his birthday. Would have been his birthday. 60 years old. Rest in peace. A very accomplished rider and a good person. That was Louis Kossuth. As sad as his passing was, we honor the accomplishments, the memory of Louis. And Louis, his dad was named Louis, I think, and he had the same name, but his papa was named Louis, and Louis was the younger junior. And he had a list of accomplishments. And his first accomplishments were back in the 1970s. He was only a little 12-year-old kid when I met him. And he won back-to-back junior Speedway national championships. He was a star junior rider. His papa gave him some very good equipment. And none of the racers at the time, I watched them, so I know this, could compete with Louis. He just was a star, #1 junior rider. Louis, as a junior rider, was going to every track. I was too, so I got to watch Louis almost every night. Pretty much tore up the track, and the racers that he competed with, he just couldn't keep up with him. Louis was by far the fastest junior rider, and he was a hot little rider. And that's when I first noticed him, and everybody who watched Louis could definitely knew that Louis would have a future in Speedway, that he was destined to be a good rider. I only had one photo with Louis, and this was me when I was 17 years old, and Louis was only about 12. He had won the main event. It was the closing night of the Chula Vista Otay Mesa track in San Diego. We had the big King of the Hill match race championship. It was the big grand finale. And it was with me, Brad Oxley, a former national champion. Also, Larry Costa, who raced for the Bellevue Aces in the British League. He was in that particular event. And I had a chance to race Larry, the best of three, and beat Larry. And then Brad and I had the championship. This was the big final. We had the big, beautiful silver cup. And I got lucky and beat Brad for that title. That was my first title. That was Brad's first title. But Louis Kossuth was in that picture. He had won practically every main event. And this was the only photo of Louis and I back in the day together. And Louis was a little guy. Look at this guy. And he was a very good rider and a cute little guy too. Woo! Louis was the 1997 D1 track champion at the Fast Fridays. He tore him up in D1 and scratch racing. And like I mentioned, he was a 3-time junior Speedway national champion, U.S. Speedway champion. And he was just a gifted rider. He also was a 2-time California State track champion. He had pretty much won all the races that he was up against, and it was difficult to beat Louis Kossuth on a Speedway bike if you were a junior rider back in the day. Like I mentioned, Louis was the wild thing. Why was he called the wild thing? Because he was a good rider and he was a wild rider. You know, he was kind of a scary rider. And when he got on that Speedway bike, he had so much experience in D1 that he was a fearful rider. You had to watch your back when you're racing Lewis in D1. And he was just an accomplished rider. He was a tough rider.
Wow.
And he was a wild thing, that's for sure. And Lewis Kossuth just had a lot of talent. He's just a good rider. And he was a tough rider also. Like I mentioned, his papa's name was Lewis Kossuth also, but they called him Louie. And Louie, he owned the 76 gas station over in Brea, California. It was like Imperial Highway or something like that. It was in Brea. And when I went to his gas station, he invited me to race at his new racetrack at Eddie Westfield at the Santa Ana Bowl. That was directly across the street from the courthouse in Santa Ana, the sheriff, jail. And they were watching us race the prisoners. And we always tried to put on a good show for them. But Louis had one of the first, not the first, but one of the first long tracks in Speedway, the Papa. And it was a quarter mile around the Speedway track. They played football in that particular arena. And we raced Speedway, and it was a beautiful, smooth, fast track. And I had a chance to really have a good experience there. And I happened to win the point championship, which was really great. That was one of my larger accomplishments as a Speedway rider. We had a weekly program of Wild Bill Cody, John Cowboy Cook, Denny Pyatt, and a whole list of good D1 riders. And I got lucky. I won the particular championship, and I was a 60-yard line handicap rider. I won a couple, swept the program a few times there also, but it was just a great event, and Louis worked really hard, the Papa, to put on that show, and it was just a great event, and little Louis raced there and won, of course. He won all those races, and I think that particular venue lasted only a few years, but it was just a really outstanding track, and Louis had passed away before Lewis did, and rest in peace, Louis and Lewis. Both of them have now passed on. But they were just both really great people, class act. And I just remember meeting the whole family. There's a whole bunch of kids in the Kossuth family. I believe the parents had separated. He had a beautiful wife. Louis had a beautiful wife, and they just had a really nice family, I remember, and it was a long time ago. But he owned that 76 gas station, and then he eventually sold it, and I'm not sure exactly what happened after that, but rest in peace, both Louis and Lewis Kossuth. Like I mentioned, it's been about 5 years since we lost Lewis in that tragic day in the shop in Northern California. And like I mentioned, today is his 60th birthday. Rest in peace. Happy birthday in heaven. And I hope you're riding those Speedway bikes up in heaven and those pearly golden gates. And I hope the Kossuth family is doing well. He had a really great family. And I wish the best for his family. And also Lewis, we always remember the great guy Lewis was, the wild thing. He was a tough rider. His sponsor used to fix my... when I had my Westlake, he used to fix the box of my Westlake, and he always tell me about Lewis, and I think his name was John or something like that. And they were just good people, and they were tough people. You know, you didn't mess with those people. You had to give them respect, or, you know, something bad may happen. And they're just nice people, though. If you treat them good, they were great to you. And we just remember the greatness of Louis Kossuth, and it's just so sad that he had passed away at such a young age, at like 55. And, you know, everyone remembers him as a good rider. And he was, like I mentioned, a hard charger. And he was the wild thing. He was a tough guy. And, you know, he was just a very sort of tough guy. And you just didn't mess around with Lewis. And I always backed off. I never messed with that guy. But today's his 60th birthday. Happy birthday. Rest in peace. And God bless the memory of Lewis Kossuth.